This conference will now be recorded.
I've done lots of work on supported decision-making across the country, including with some of you in Nebraska, and I'm looking forward to taking this journey with you.
I'll go ahead. I'm Mark Smith. I'm on the faculty of the University of Nebraska Medical Center at the Monroe-Meyer Institute, our USET and LEN for Nebraska. My director, Mark Shriver, is in clinic all day, so I am a stand-in and pale comparison. So,
I'm Tony Green. I'm the director for the Division of Developmental Disabilities and oversee both of our aging and our disability waivers here in Nebraska.
I'm Marla Fisher. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of Public Guardian.
I'm Cynthia Braumeyer, State Unit on Aging Administrator.
Hello, I'm Lindy Foley, and I'm the Director for Nebraska VR Vocational Rehabilitation.
Good morning, I'm Teresa Hayes. I work at the Nebraska Department of Education in the Office of Special Ed. I am the Transition Coordinator for Nebraska, as well as a Program Specialist in our office.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kristen Larson. I'm the Executive Director for the Nebraska Council on Developmental Disabilities. We're part of the DD Network, so our partners are certainly Monroe-Meyer Institute's USED and Disability Rights Nebraska, and we look forward to the partnering in this project.
I can go. I'm Antonio Carranza, and I am the Legal Assistance Developer with the State Unit on Aging.
Brittany Harrington, Title 3B, 3E, and Care Management Program Coordinator with the State Unit on Aging.
And I am Brad Murins. I am the Public Policy Director at Disability Rights Nebraska.
And Ben, I noticed you just joined us. We were going around doing introductions.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Ben Stromberg. I am a program manager with the State Unit on Aging with the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services.
Excellent. Is there anybody I missed? Penny, did you have an opportunity to introduce yourself? So Penny, we saw that your mic was on, but we didn't hear anything.
So Penny is the state long-term care ombudsman.
Great, okay.
She is having audio difficulty.
Technical difficulties.
Well, you know, it is a web-based phone call, so we got to have those.
I know. It wouldn't be one without. So again, welcome to all of you. I just would like to take a moment to review what's been going on to date around supported decision making. And I think it was what, 2 years ago or so, Brad, that we started doing some research on supported decision making and looking at it as a possibility for some, systemic level involvement. And Brad and we had a doctoral research student who also worked with us on looking at what was going on nationally in the area of supported decision making. We developed some materials. Brad went out and did a number of presentations to some groups. And as a result of that, we saw that there was an interest in Nebraska and exploring how we could create an option for supported decision making in Nebraska. We then, as the part of the Developmental Disabilities Network, along with our partners at the Developmental Disabilities Council and the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities at Monroe-Meyer, each year we have an annual meeting where we bring together our staff and board of directors, or community advisory board in case of Monroe-Meyer. And this year we focused on supported decision making, and we had Jonathan working with us in developing the presentation, and we had a panel that had some members who were on the call today with us to talk about guardianship and alternatives in Nebraska, or the issue with the lack of a lot of alternatives in Nebraska. And as a result of that, there was again substantial interest, and based upon that, I developed a work plan for our upcoming federal fiscal year, which begins October 1st, around supported decision making. So I'm in the process of getting that work plan ready to go here, working with Jonathan on finalizing a contract for his consultation with us in the upcoming year. And we'll also be contracting with Mary Phillips, who some of you also know. Mary is a former special education administrator and teacher, has a adult daughter who she has worked with on supported decision making here in Nebraska, as opposed to moving forward with a guardianship, which is what she was kind of told that she should do. So I think we've got some good consultants who will be working with us. Jonathan, in terms of his knowledge of SDM and his work in that area over the years, and then Mary, who has been kind of boots on the ground with this issue in her own life with her daughter. So she brings the perspective of a parent, and then also the perspective of her daughter Erin into this conversation. So I'm looking forward to working with both Jonathan and Mary on that. Brad will be the lead staff person at Disability Rights Nebraska, working on this project. I'm in the final phases of my glide out towards retirement here. So hopefully, if everything goes well, by the end of next June, I will be making my own transition. And then this will be moving forward with your all's work and support under Brad's leadership in this area. So what I wanted to just review with you before we start the new fiscal year and we really get this initiative going is just an opportunity to kind of let you know as to what we're thinking about and how we're going to approach this structurally, and then maybe answer some of the question, well, what's our role as an organization and individual in this process. So in talking with Jonathan over the summer here and trying to kind of figure out what path we might go down and where we kind of should start, we felt that it would be good to keep the folks that we've been working with initially and then expand that somewhat, which is what we're doing today, for our steering committee work. So the steering committee is a group of people that we will have meeting on a regular basis. I'm thinking about once a month 1-hour virtual meeting there. And the steering committee will kind of be responsible for, keeping the initiative moving forward. All right. So they'll be meeting on a monthly basis to discuss any issues that are coming up and brainstorm as to how to address them. We'll be having our first meeting of this group again in October, and at that point, the group will be working to help us identify who else we would want to bring into this process, but not at the steering committee level, because we'll have a larger group working as well. And that will be our Nebraska Task Force on Supported Decision Making. So with the task force, we'll be looking at other organizations and individuals who may be not quite as central to the initiative as the folks in the steering committee, but still important to bring them on and have discussions with them. So I'm thinking about, that's where we bring in representatives of the State Bar Association. We'd bring in representatives possibly from the ACLU. I don't know if there would be value in bringing in somebody from AARP. I'll look to our aging experts in that when we have that kind of discussion. So again, I'm looking at the task force being a larger entity, that group meeting on a quarterly basis for about a 2-hour meeting. At this point, I'm still thinking virtual meetings that we're probably not going to move forward for an in-person meeting until later on in the fiscal year. Then we can reevaluate that. What our discussion with Jonathan has, and I'll let Jonathan jump in here if he would like to. Our discussion with Jonathan initially focused on the importance of outreach and education around supported decision making. Before we move into any, policy changes or legislative changes or anything like that, what we need to do is go out and do outreach and education around supported decision making. And the focus of those efforts would be on parents, people with disabilities, educators, the transition staff and VR. I'm thinking of service coordinators within the Division of Developmental Disabilities. Again, with the aging area, I'm less familiar with the structure and operation of that, but looking to Cynthia and her folks to kind of give us a sense of if there's educational activities around that would be beneficial to reach out to that population. So I'm looking at the first year as being getting the steering committee and the task force organized up and going, as well as doing an initial outreach effort and then a more focused educational effort during this first year of our work in supported decision making. Jonathan, any comments?
I think those are great ideas for 2 reasons. For all the reasons you said about reaching out to the people who I call the on-the-ground supported decision-making users, because they are the ones who are most at need of information and knowledge about this, because they're the ones who are most directly involved with guardianship. We know that teachers are the #1 referral source, and we know that parents are the ones who seek guardianship, for example. So just giving them information and knowledge about other options we've seen in state after state is incredibly useful, because every parent who uses supported decision making becomes an advocate for it. So you build a groundswell. But secondly, if your long-term goal is legislation, the education and outreach is critical to build a constituency. We should not make the mistake, as other states have done, I've seen it happen, of thinking people already know this. What's going to happen are the same people are going to oppose any legislation you put forth, as always do. You're going to have estates and trust lawyers, you may have some parent groups, you may have some judges, all making the same arguments about we need to have guardianship and don't need supported decision making because of safety. We need as many people as possible who are prepped and understand that, one, we're not talking about abolishing guardianship, and two, we're not putting people at risk. We are merely providing options to people who had no idea about them, and options that are consistent with the law and policy of the state. So the educational outreach is critical to establish both of those goals.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, Jonathan. I'll also look to my network partners here because they've been actively involved in the conversations as well. So Mark and Kristen, if there's anything you'd like to weigh in on, that would be great.
I might just note on behalf of the Nebraska Council on Developmental Disabilities, we're submitting our state plan with our new goals and objectives for the coming 5 years. One of those goals is very broad and does touch on self-determination and supporting folks with making, living as independent as possible. And so the supported decision-making effort definitely fits within that parameter. So we are committed to collaborating. We're writing this collaboration into our state plan for the federal government or federal funding source to review. We have federal funds that are set aside for sub-award projects, and we feel comfortable committing some of those funds to the educational and outreach effort with working with Disability Rights Nebraska on that. So yeah, we're pretty excited, very pleased that we have Jonathan on board. We're very fortunate to have a national subject matter expert help us in this process. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and a couple things. One, just in terms of kind of as we talked about in June, kind of the state of affairs in terms of guardianship and supported decision making in Nebraska, I think from our perspective really needs a lot of attention. We're in the middle of writing our goals for the next 5 years to start next July. So I feel quite confident that we'll be including this in one of the areas that we're going to be attending to. We're quite committed, I think, as a program to take the work that we did in June and really see where we can go with it. I know, from working with lots and lots of families that the idea of supported decision making doesn't come up very often because when parents walk into a courtroom and say, well, I really probably only need power of attorney or medical power, judges are saying full guardianship or why are you bothering me? And so there's definitely a need for change. And in terms of the numbers of folks with guardians, it's just kind of like the number of folks that are on psychoactive medications. It's like alarmingly high. So the main point, I guess, trying not to ramble, but it's been a week, is that the University Center is committed to supporting this effort. I see us writing this into our grant objectives going forward. Very glad Jonathan is able to join us in this, and thank you to Eric for facilitating that. And I think from our perspective, especially as a federal partner, and the fact that we are trying to work together as federal partners is, and the fact that we have so many folks, there's so much interest in this coming from the disability community in Nebraska, is gratifying to see, and we're quite hopeful that we can make some significant progress.
Thanks, Kristen and Mark. Appreciate that. As I said, one of our next tasks when we meet again as a steering committee is to talk about the composition of the task force and talk about what the charge to the task force will be. It may be that as we move through this, the task force breaks into some smaller work groups that we support their work, focusing on specific pieces of the overall initiative that we lay out. I'm seeing one of the products of the task force being an actual plan for implementation plan for establishing supported decision making in Nebraska. So hopefully we can get that plan established, relatively quickly, and then that will be a flexible document that's out there that will be available to continue to guide the work that we're doing over the next several years. So at this point, I sent you out my page. Glad you could join. We have already done introductions and everything, so I was just we were talking about how we've got to this point and what we're going to be doing with the initiative. And I'm happy to, if you want to give me a call or anything, I'm happy to talk more with you about what we've talked about already. But Lindy's on the phone, so you can also, follow up with Lindy.
Thanks, Eric. I'm sorry I'm late.
Oh, that's all right. In terms of the materials that I sent out to you, that's just to give you, again, an idea of what is going on within supported decision-making nationally. If we look at the Guardianship Summit, there's a clear call in the Guardianship Summit for creating alternatives to guardianships, including supported decision making. The U.S. Department of Education's transition report in 2020, I think it was, also called for alternatives to guardianship being discussed more during the transition process for students. Tony sent us some information from the National Core Indicator survey data on self-determination and decision making. Again, all this information supports that this is the time for us, probably past time for us to be moving forward with such an initiative here in Nebraska. So we also had, I sent you Jonathan's research article on talking about supported decision making. So again, this is starting to really move as a alternative guardianship. We're getting much more robust in what's happening nationally with supported decision making. Jonathan, how many states do we currently have who have moved forward with supported decision making?
13 in DC. New Hampshire passed a few weeks ago. So my article was out of date before it was even published. That's how fast they're moving.
Yeah.
I think it's really impressive. Again, I always say that the Jenny Hatch case was in 2013. And since then, just 8 years, 14 different US jurisdictions. When you say the time is right, the time is absolutely right. I've never seen momentum around national legislation like this.
Great. So at this point, since we have Jonathan here and some of the other DD network partners who have been involved in this, and Brad, who has also contributed to the research on this issue, I'd like to open it up for people if they have any questions at this point in time. Again, it's a little hazy at this point. I mean, I do have cataracts, so it's hazy all the time for me, but it's a little hazier now in terms of what we're going to be doing until we have our couple more meetings with the steering committee and getting the task force up and operating. But any questions or comments that people would like to offer?
No, Eric, I was just going to mention that Addison McDonald, the executive director for the ARC of Nebraska, joined a little bit late. And I wanted to thank Edison because he did coordinate an effort with the DD Network, with the ARC of Nebraska, to release an article on the topic of supported decision making, like an editorial that's gone out to different papers, and I think that's generated some good interest too. But just wanted to acknowledge that he's a really main player in the effort as well.
Thanks, Kristen.
And Edison, I actually did get a phone call from an individual who was interested, a person with a disability, who was interested in supported decision making as a result of that op-ed piece. So
great to hear.
Yeah.
Hey, Eric, I've
yes.
got a question on just kind of, I think one of the things I've noticed, especially we've been really engaged with the person-centered planning training. And one of the things I keep hearing from service coordinators and from families is just when does person-centered planning begin? And I think, you know, same sort of question. I'm wondering if the same sort of question is going to come up with supported decision making, and just saying like, when does it start? And I think, you know, there are a lot of folks who are almost, you know, they're waiting for permission to start that. And I think we all know, like, you know, really it should already be started on person-centered planning. Like, you know, you should be starting to integrate those practices in. But, you know, I think one of my concerns is I've been thinking more about our work on supported decision making is, you know, like saying, okay, when does it start? Because right now you can go and you could have a family set up a supported decision making structure and say like, hey, you're going to go ahead and do it since the law is permissive. But I've kind of been thinking and saying, well, you know, do we need to kind of have a date that we go and set off as kind of I don't know, a celebration or a mile marker where we can really kind of get people in that mindset of like, hey, supported decision making is here. You can start using this. You can start, you know, implementing this into your planning process. That makes sense, or anybody has any thoughts on that? I'd love to hear them.
I have a couple of ideas on that.
Yeah.
This is why Eric's idea of education first is so important. I think we should be discussing supported decision making educationally, not as a separate thing that begins at a separate time that follows separate rules and encompasses separate forms. What we talk about in a lot of the jurisdictions I've worked in is that supported decision making is just decision making. It begins when you start making decisions. Every person without disabilities uses supported decision making every day. We just don't call it that. Every time you ask the doctor to explain things in plain language, every time you ask a friend for advice, every time you use a cliche like don't make a snap judgment or get a second opinion, you are using or advocating for supported decision making. So as an educational standpoint from that early stage, that's one of the most important things we can do is normalize supported decision making, not as a program for people with disabilities, but as something that we all use. If, however, we want to tie it to something, what we did in the District of Columbia working with DC Public Schools, where we created the first policy around supported decision making, was we started talking, when does transition planning start? And the consensus is age 3, pre-K. You are starting on your independent living goals the second you walk out into the school. So there is no reason why you shouldn't start talking to people about making decisions with support, having support groups, that it's okay to get support, telling parents that it's okay to give and get support. That's how we wrote that in their policy. There, they start looking at a quote unquote formalized SDM process around 8th or 9th grade, where people are encouraged to bring together a support team, start having discussions about hows and whens and wheres. And by the time they're 18, they sign a supported decision-making and education agreement, which then says at the front end, these are the people I want coming to meetings. These are the permissions I give them. This is what I want them to do with me as the final decision maker. So two things. One, we shouldn't tie the concept of SDM to any particular date. It ought to be part of life. That's part of our education. But two, we ought to be talking about integrating the practice of supported decision making into special education, into voc rehab, into person-centered planning. Because if you look at the definitions of all those things, the student-led IEP, informed choice in VR, and person-centered planning are all permutations of SDM. So we should be educating to inculcate SDM into where it should already be, and to educate people that SDM is the same for their children and the people they work with as it is for them.
Thanks, Jonathan. And yeah, I guess my sense is that supported decision-making begins when self-determination begins. When people are starting to become, and that's probably around age 3 or so, right? When people are starting to do it, all of us start out, you know, in a situation where other people are making decisions for us, and over time, we develop relationships with people who can support us in our decision making, as opposed to direct us in terms of our decisions. So thank you, Jonathan. Yeah.
I mean, I guess my thought is not so much around an age, but around a specific date, time. You know, I think what I've seen of people is that, you know, they need some sort of like, hey, this is going now. This is something we can do. You know, that they need some sort of like point almost. Because I think otherwise it just keeps on sliding. And I'll point back to, you know, our conversations around, you know, really trying to make sure that we're taking that movement forward. And even though we've had, you know, thousands, I think, of people trained, we still aren't seeing, you know, real person-centered planning changes starting to take place. And people are still asking, like, hey, when is this going to begin? And I'm just afraid that unless we kind of set some sort of time to say, hey, we're going to have, you know, like a big kind of, this is really the time we're going to hammer on this, I'm afraid that it'll just continue to slip from people's minds, and they'll be waiting for somebody, you know, like Tony to say, hey, this is starting now, is my fear.
Yeah. So Edison, I hear you saying is when is it going to kick off? When is supported decision making really going to be a practice that's going to be available to people, and how do we make sure they know that?
Yeah. Like
if that's the case, I think that's something for a discussion within the task force. And part of the planning process would be to identify a date where we might have some kind of a bigger notification to the public and everyone about supported decision making is here in Nebraska.
Well, I think that's a great idea to have like an educational, informative event. I think as a general rule, whenever someone asks me, when do I start supported decision making in practice, my answer is always right now. It doesn't matter if you're 3, you're 13, you're 80. The second you know about it is the second you start it. And I think it's on us as we develop our educational outreach materials to stress that this is the kind of thing that travels through life. I would say, again, SDM is the through line from age 3 pre-K to end of life planning. So wherever you are on the life course, you should be beginning, and you probably already have, just haven't called it that, SDM. That's part of our education.
Yeah, no, I think that's another piece. Like, we constantly get folks who are calling and asking about guardianships. And I think it's weird, since the pandemic, it's almost as if folks' minds have changed and they've started to really worry about, a lot more about what happens when I pass on. And that's been probably our largest set of calls, have been calls around guardianships, and spent a lot of time trying to kind of talk folks through and say, hey, here's some less restrictive alternatives, or, let's talk about supported decision making. So I think some of that just kind of naturally comes, but I think especially when we try and make the transition and try and get those large number of folks who are really in overly restrictive guardianships, that, as we try and get them transitioned, I think we're really going to need to have some sort of big specific push. I know, like this month, we have Medicaid buy-in expansion starting to take effect from the changes implemented in LB 323. So we're going to have a press conference on October 1st, the first day that takes off, and then have phone banks and text banks reaching out to folks, because I think I don't know, I'm a community organizer by training, and we talk about the ladder of engagement. And when we talk about changing something like a guardianship, that's a big step. And so I feel like we're going to really need to have kind of that big push and that big step, because I think you're completely right on the education and information that needs to be built in, but we're also going to need some sort of time that we kind of say, like, this is it, this is when our real big push is going to be, and people need to be inundated with that from every direction that we can.
I think that's a really good idea. In the chat box, I've put some material, including the DC public school policies and a series of educational brochures I co-wrote with the Missouri DD Council that can be part of the educational resources and push I think Edison's talking about. Maybe as we put out material, we gather them into one place and then one day have that kickoff, that supported decision-making conference event where we've got our stuff together and we've got material to give people so that they know this is a real and tangible option as opposed to hot air.
Thank you. Appreciate the discussion. I'm looking forward to have more discussions like this as we move forward. Again, anyone have any other questions or comments? Got an opportunity to talk with Jonathan here. You'll have more opportunities to talk with him, but.
Eric, can you remind me, the folks that are on the steering committee, will we also be asked to participate in the task force?
Yes, there would be an overlap between the steering committee and the task force, yes. It may not be the same people. So you may have a couple of people from an agency or organization involved, one at the steering committee level, one at the task force level. But we'll work out those details as we have conversations about the composition of the task force.
I just put in the chat box my contact info. Reach out anytime. Often the best ideas and the best questions come 20 minutes after the meeting ends. I am very happy to talk. That's the way we're going to find the best solutions and identify the most important issues.
So again, if there's no further questions at this time, I would like to see if we could set up a meeting for the steering committee again in October to have a discussion about finalize who's on the steering committee. And I noticed that Brad and I talked yesterday. We don't have someone from People First of Nebraska on the steering committee, so we've reached out to People First of Nebraska to ask them to give us some names of folks who may be interested in participating on both the steering committee and the task force level. So so I'm looking at the one possibility being the week of October 11th or the week of the 25th. Is there, we can send out a doodle poll with some available times on that. Is there are there times that work better in general for people, like avoid Fridays kind of thing, right? Or avoid Mondays kind of thing, not after 3 or something like that. So are there any limitations that people kind of have on that we should be aware of? If not, April can send out a doodle poll.
Well, Eric, I know that Mark Shriver will never be available on Tuesdays. That's
on Tuesday. That's true. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Yep.
Eric and April, for the week of October 25th, we want you to be aware that the Disability Education Series is featuring Disability Employment Awareness Month on that, the 26th, I think the 26th, 27th, and 28th from like 1 to 2:30. So many of us will be involved with that effort. Yeah.
Okay. So we won't put that time in the.
Right, and it looks like there's a CAB meeting too on October 29th, right, Mark Smith?
There is.
Okay.
And orientation that morning for new members. So,
if we could schedule for the week of the 25th, selfishly speaking, I'm on trial all the prior week, and we'll be prepping all the prior week to that.
Week for that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right, so let's start off with that week and see if we can get a time then. So we'll send out a doodle poll for the week of the 20, whatever that was, 25th or whatever. So at this point, if anyone has any further questions, you have Jonathan's contact information. If it's around STM in particular, if it's around the project here, you can contact Brad and I at our through our general office number. And other than that, I think that kind of brings us towards the end of the meeting. Any final comments, thoughts?
I know that Mark will probably want to see if he could watch the recording. Where would we get that from, Eric?
Well, we recorded this for the purposes of taking minutes.
Okay.
I actually can make the link available through YouTube, so I can certainly share that with anyone that would like it. I know I've extended it to Paige, but if anyone else would like it, just let me know and I can send you a link for that.
I would, thanks for mentioning that, Mark. That's a good idea. We should send it to other folks. I think Seamus Kelly was going to be our kind of rep from attorneys and stuff. So maybe we can send it with Seamus, and if there's anyone else that we should send it to. Teresa, do you think there's any need to share this with Chris or anyone like that?
I mean, we certainly could. I'm sure they wouldn't mind knowing. So I think that would be all right. Yeah.
Okay. So April, you and I can talk about who wasn't on the call today that we could share this with. All right.
Great, thank you.
So any final comments? Well, there being none.
Onward.
For your, there was a final comment. Who was making it?
I was just saying forward. We're going to do great.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for your time today, and look forward to having future conversations with this as we move forward with the initiative. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you.